Master Tavern Keeper's History of the Old World.
And so, onto the fight at Dungal Hill, as described in the poem, MacGregor's Folly. Now, 'tis worth stressing again that it was apparently written by the squire of the knight-errant John Quickshire, Sandra Pangle, and that does mean the account is a little biased, especially one bit in particular, but that doesn't mean it isn't a useful lens through which to look at the events of the day.
Well, if there's one thing I've learnt in all my years of hearing stories, it's this. All retellings are but a single facet of a tale, and, more often than not, each tells us more about the teller than the tale itself. We are all unreliable narrators in front of the stage of our lives.
To be true, my dear friend. Anyhow, let's just get back to our own unreliable narrator, Sandra Pangle, and her poem. It begins with Archer's Oracles, Dwarf Miners. With orc, with goblin, and with the old giant Grimmack. MacGregor had taken Dungal Hill, every barrel lock and stock. Apart from the silver mine of the dwarves, of the prospector Archer's Oracle, whom he trapped down there to save his orcs from a bloody, vengeful neckle. A year they'd spent in the mine, each day hungry, wet and blind. Each one bore an angry heart, and each one bore a bitter mind. The dwarfs had watched their treasure chests dragged away by the greedy greenskins, and were eager to gift their trusty pickaxes some fresh red blood-stained death rings. The day before they clashed, a message reached the mine. Friends, end your fast, for on the morrow comes the awaited time. The knights of Ness and Dunalbane are near, sharpen your blades, and fan the flames of your hate, and prepare to see MacGregor paid. And so Zargle's miners grinned at the prospect of ending many orc lives, and loosened up the boards that had kept them there inside. No more living on nought better than bug, worm and rat, that very leanest of deep, damp diets that left each one without fat. The sun rose the next morn to the sound of many marching feet. First Donalbain from the west with the MacCooligans and whiskey. Second from the south came Ness, led by fair Quickshire and Dart. And at last it was the anointed time for the bloodletting to start. But, gentlemen, let us just take a breather before we go any further. As I just want to add a few more details to what Pangle wrote in her poem.
Please. Anything that expands our understanding is always appreciated.
Excellent. Well, first of all, just so it's clear, the forces of both the Alliance and those of MacGregor were far larger than, say, those of the Malcolm of Loch or the two clans at Winwood. So, hopefully, Heinrich, this fight will be more to your liking. Oh, yeah, but what kind of numbers are we really talking about, though? Well, most of the MacCooligans had survived the raid on the distillery and numbered just shy of around 30. In addition to their laird, Docco, as well as Prince Donalbain and Murgray the Wizard. The whole force had been moving quite slowly since leaving the Lorne Valley, as they'd brought along the dray, carrying all the whiskey, and with it being such a rickety thing, pulled by a pair of horses, were rather on the old side, let's say. Well, it couldn't move any faster than a leisurely walking pace. But it wasn't far from Loch Lorne to Dungal, not when compared to the distance to Ness at least. Now, the Knights of Ness had actually travelled rather quickly north along the road linking their home to Dungal Hill, so both end up arriving at the same time. But the force brought by the Earl was no large contingent of warriors. In fact, they only numbered 10, and one of these was the Earl. A dart on horseback. The other knights were on foot, but it's worth saying that what they lacked for in quantity, they made up for in quality. Now, in addition to the forces of Donalbain and the MacGooligans and the Knights of Harkness, was the knight-errant John Quickshire and his squire Sandra Pangwell. They acted as a go-between between these two groups. Both of these had initially travelled to secure the aid of Harkness on horseback, although Pangwell had lost hers on the journey to Harkness after the two battle of beasts out of Fagmar Forest. Anyhow, there's one more group we must not forget about, and that's the miners. They now numbered only 10, for only the strongest had survived their year-long entrapment in the mine. This did include their leader, though, the powerful dwarf prospector, Arcazargal. He was stubborn, even for a dwarf, a race renowned for their stubbornness. But without his Gromrel's strong will, the miners would never have held out so long. He was also noteworthy for the weapon that he bore. He wielded a magical warhammer known as Grung Grung, which means a hammer of the mines in Khazalid, I believe. Miners tend to use pickaxes rather than hammers, as you'd imagine, but it had been his father's weapon, and he refused to give it up and use anything else. Anyhow, let's get ourselves back to the poem. MacGregor was in the inn when the sentry's cries rang out, and orc and goblin and giant stopped and looked all about. They poured out of the village, blades ready and arrows knocked, and Markle Grimac hefted up his club, legs unsteady, head half cocked. But as MacGregor's minions made ready to make bloody war, Arcazargal and his miners smashed open the locked mine door, and as three his foes came down upon that lieutenant of MacDeath, but no one of them would be the one to bring about his final breath. Excuse me, Master Alchemist, please wait a moment. MacGregor survived this battle then? Why did the poet give away the ending so early on in the poem? I don't understand. Look, but she didn't. She didn't. Just hold on to your horses there. Listen, and you'll find out what really happened. Anyhow, as you've stopped me here, I may as well use this opportunity to talk about the disposition of MacGregor and his forces. You know, where they were in the old Dungal village itself, and then we'll get into the fight proper. Now, of the greenskins that he'd initially brought with him, only around 40 of the orcs still lived, and perhaps 15 or so of the goblin archers. 10 orcs guarded the mine entrance where the dwarves were. Then there was another 2 that were located in toll booths on the 2 roads into the village. The other orcs were divided between the 2 sod houses in the village proper, which were used as barracks, and also the inn. These orcs were guarding MacGregor himself. The goblins were all holed up at the windmill, guarding the 3 stolen treasure chests belonging to the dwarves, as was the drunken giant Markle Grimac, who was repairing one of the sails at the time that the Alliance arrived. Now, there is one more person of interest I simply must mention, and that's MacGregor's valet, the halfling Rabies. He accompanied MacGregor everywhere he went, and he hated every moment of it, having spent his entire adult life effectively as the personal slave of his cruel master. He had become the property of MacGregor after the death of his entire family as a result of one of MacGregor's spells going awry. It was Rabies' dearest wish to see his master dead, and preferably by his own hands. Just keep your man here in mind, eh? Anyhow, back to the poem. 'Twas the blades of Harkness that first shed enemy blood, storming the lone orc hidden within a box of wood. The sneaky orc had shot off a bolt from his crude crossbow, only to miss, and then encircled was butchered by blow after blow. John Quickshire too drew his sword, eager for blood to spill, and spied Markle Grimac standing by the old windmill. The giant lumbered forwards towards the charging knight, whilst the goblins around his ankles sent arrows off into flight. But each rain of shots merely pattered harmlessly off Quickshire's heavy plate, each irritating knock and snap adding fuel unto his head. He raised his shield as he charged, but kept his lance aimed low, and sent old Grimmack crashing over, crushing the goblins below. Then the remaining greenskins scampered and swarmed all over Quickshire, dragging him from his hork, daggers flashing in the furore. But then came Dart, his flaming blade, scarring away their foes, carving and cauterizing the goblins, screams soothing their death throes. The goblins ran to the nearby orcs and drew arrows from their quivers, but with the charging feet of squire and knight, the greenskins began to wither, and our noble blades cut fast and true, spilling blood upon the ground. And Dart and Quickshire turned to face Grimmack, but nowhere could he be found.
What? So the great giant, Markle Grimmack, simply turned and fled. There was no duel between he, the Earl of Harkness, and Quickshire, like in the play.
Och, now, if you recall, I did mention that Pangle's poem was a little biased. She was Quickshire's squire, after all. Well, this is the part. According to other eyewitnesses, there was indeed a duel between the two knights and the giant, but it was not one that Dart and Quickshire wanted to become widely known. What happened was this, apparently. After the goblins had been scattered, Dart, Quickshire, and Grimmack faced off against each other.
Time to bunk your heads. Not while I have strength in my arms, and I've fire in my blade.
And with that, the two knights charged the giant from opposite directions. Grimmack swung his great club wildly at Quickshire, missed, and instead struck the flaming blade of Dart, knocking it out of his hands and plunging it into the side of the nearby windmill. Meanwhile, Quickshire weaved past the flailing limbs of the drunken giant and plunged his sword deep into Grimmack's leg.
That tickles.
And with a flick of his wrist, Markle swatted the offending knight away, before pulling out the sword and throwing it into some long grass nearby. But at this very moment, with Dart trying to prise his blade out of the burning windmill, and the bruised Quickshire poking around in the weeds looking for his own weapon, Pangle came to their aid. She held up a bottle of whiskey, allowing it to catch in the sunlight, and wink at the giant. And at his exclamation, she turned tail and ran, with the inebriated footsteps of Grimmack following close behind, although not close enough to catch her. Anyhow, that was the end of the old giant's participation in the battle. Different from the poem, as you can see.
And different from the play. Well, I don't suppose we can expect too much truth from works of entertainment.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I think the role of your historical dramas is to teach us the truth about our own world and ourselves, rather than to chronicle every nail and floorboard that existed in the world that was. They teach truth. It's just not the one that you're expecting. Anyhow, let's get ourselves back to the poem. From the west came the drunken McCooligans and a sober Donald Bain, rowdy and loud as a foolskin and as rough as a lion's mane. They charged headlong towards the ford across the river Rosh, and their fierce battle cries rang through the valley as they waded in and crossed. The orcs in the village were already moving upon the knights of Harkness, when they heard the battle rattles of the clansmen and were forced to turn and redress. But these were then joined by the calls of the dwarves from down in the mine, eager to kill each and every orc that their sharp pickaxes could find. Ian MacGregor spun about, his enemies to the north, south and west, and began to call forth his dark magic to bring death to the knights of Harkness. When from on the hill came a ball of fire from the hands of the magician Mergrey, and caught MacGregor unawares, engulfing him in a fiery display. Burnt MacGregor conjured up a wind and cast it at Mergrey. The wizard of Dunkel was blown off the hill, tumbled down, unmoving lay. But MacGregor himself was badly cindered, his skin red raw and cracked. And this was the moment that Rabies went to draw his dagger and to act. As dwarf cut open orc, and MacCooligan ripped them in twain, and knights plunged their swords into greenskin, delighting in the howls of their pain. Rabies advanced on his master, teeth clenched and lips back curled, and slipped his dagger in deep, and ended MacGregor's world. And yet the battle continued until the sun grew low. Men, dwarf, and orc, and goblin lay dead by mortal blow. But at sunset it was Zargle, Harkness, and Donal Bane who were one step closer to ending hateful McDeath's short reign.
En heim går vi folket daglein. Ned du her i Kjersal, njon kjøyd mi gubrar, njåslanj, le må ha borste